ask the panel or RPA staff questions related to transportation in Area 11. Okay, so first things first, what is RPA? Where is Area 11? What do area plans do? What is this? Who are you people? What is all this? I'm sure some folks here, probably this is your first time being engaged with the process. Welcome, but if you've been here for a little while, then just bear with me. I'm going to give a quick rundown of this stuff. So the RPA is the agency that works for and makes recommendations to the Chattanooga Planning Commission and the Hamilton County Planning Commission. Those are the appointed boards that make the decisions on rezoning and other land use cases that are brought before them. RPA makes recommendations to them for rezoning cases, whether we think they should approve or deny or something in between. But we also do things like research and analysis. We handle we staff the federally mandated transportation planning organization that handles the federal transportation funding. And then, as Karen said, our team, community planning and design, develops those land use plans for different parts of the city and county. So as we said, this is Area 11. We just recently completed a plan for East Chattanooga, broadly speaking, which was Area 3. And before that, we did a plan for Appleton and Ooltewah area, which was Area 12. That was done a couple of years ago. So what do plans do and what don't they do? So plans, first of all, they analyze existing conditions. We spent a lot of months before we got to this point looking over demographics, the transportation network, also looking at the state of jobs and housing, the state of parks and greenways and recreation, things like that. Plans do provide a community vision for future land uses, for the development pattern and character of everything, of housing, commercial, institutional development, for transportation infrastructure priorities, and for open spaces, parks and greenways, that sort of thing. Plans also guide rezoning decisions. I'm restating myself here a little bit, but just want to be very clear. When a developer or builder wants to rezone a property, this plan will be used once it's adopted by RPA staff and Planning Commission to help decide whether to approve that request or not. And then lastly, it guides public infrastructure investments. That includes recommendations for roads, bridges, sidewalks, sewer, and other investments. But I'm going to skip over to that bottom bullet there on the right side. What plans don't do, they don't ensure funding for those projects. It makes recommendations only. So we don't build anything. That's up to entities like TDOT, to WWTA, to Hamilton County Schools, to look to our recommendations and to follow them if that fits their needs. Going back to the top there, plans don't regulate zoning or change zoning. So in order for properties to be rezoned by local government, a follow-up study would need to be done to specifically look at rezoning. And that can only be done at the request of your city councilor, at least in the city. And then lastly, they don't directly address social issues. So things like education and healthcare and affordable housing. The plans will oftentimes acknowledge that those are issues going on in that community, but it's mainly focused on land use. Okay, so Area 11. This is East Brainerd, broadly speaking, more or less. It's an 11 square mile area that is east of I-75 and east of South Chick Creek there in the southwest corner, inside the city limits. And it's bordered by Georgia to the south there, and then the edge of the city to the north and to the east. As we mentioned before, Area 12, that's that eastern boundary where it's unincorporated county. That includes Ooltewah and Appleton. But Area 11, that's known pretty well for notably Hamilton Place Mall, but it's also home to a lot of long-standing neighborhoods here, some for many decades. And of course, this area experienced some tragedy last year with the April tornadoes. We want to acknowledge that a lot of work has been done to clean up and rebuild, but a lot of families are still struggling in the aftermath. So certainly something to be aware of as we're developing this plan. Okay, so back in the spring, we had a kickoff event where a corresponding survey went out, and we asked people to residents, business owners, anybody who wanted to participate that was in this area to tell us about East Brainerd. This question arose: what's the most critical issue facing Area 11 today? And lo and behold, surprise, surprise, transportation is the top issue there, just edging out development a little. So 21.9% of the respondents, when asked what is the most critical issue facing this area, is traffic congestion, followed pretty closely by road maintenance. Everybody's perception of congestion can be a little bit different. So what might be a little bit of a delay to me could be a really big delay to you. It's a subjective term, but it's clearly an issue for most people here, just by how it shows up in this kickoff survey. We're going to spend the majority of time today speaking to that former problem, as road maintenance, even though it's related to growth and to planning, it's kind of more of a budgetary problem. And some of our panelists can speak to that, certainly. And we do want to acknowledge that road maintenance certainly is an issue to be aware of, but we can answer questions about that, but we'll be focusing more on traffic congestion today. So RPA, other agencies, including the groups that our experts today are a part of, we're all very well of the concerns about congestion in this area. A lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort has gone to addressing and alleviating it. So this here is in a map of recently completed projects within this area, as well as projects that are ongoing, that are funded, and that are planned. Some of these are paid for by local dollars, others are paid by state or federal funding or grant money. So I'm just going to go down the list right here to kind of familiarize us all with what has been going on and what will be going on. We've got the Goodwin Road, the creation of Goodwin Road between Gun Barrel and Jenkins Road. We've got lots of resurfacing projects that have happened, parts of Davison, Julian Road, Jenkins Road, Mintom up there. And then we've got roundabouts that were installed at Hamilton Place and Igu Gap. And then the widenings, we've widened Gun Barrel Road north of Shalford there between Shalford and Mintop Road. And then widened Shalford itself between I-75 and Jenkins Road. Ongoing, there's signal prioritization for Carter Route 4. So this is a new system that will allow buses to change the light to green whenever they approach that intersection, which is really efficient because it's the most heavily used route in Carter's network. So a lot of people are getting through that light in a single vehicle. It's just a good efficiency that we've added there, are continuing to add there. And then funded and planned, there's the Goodwin Road extension from Hamilton Place Boulevard to Gun Barrel Road, and the planned I-75 interchange at Hamilton Place Boulevard. So this is what the intent of this is, to connect I-75 to Gun Barrel via Hamilton Place Boulevard, and we'll have a new on-ramp there. And this is the whole purpose of this, is to spread out that congestion that people are feeling at Shalford Road, which is, I think, according to our RNA people, the most congested spot in the entire area. It's partly funded, the Goodwin Road part is, and the I-75 interchange component is still in the planning phase. There's also resurfacing planned down the road. That means repaving existing roads, and that's for 2022 and 2023, but I left it off the map for now since the agreement with the contractor hasn't been finalized just yet. We're not 100% certain of which roads will be getting repaved, but we can tell you to expect several projects for local neighborhoods coming in the future. So one more point I want to stress is that funding for widenings from state and federal governments is extremely competitive. There's a lot of needs all over the state, all over the country, and there's limited funding to address it. So, or to use that sort of implementation to address congestion. So while we've done several widening projects in this area, we don't anticipate more funding for that type of congestion alleviation in this area in the near future. So one of the things that I'd like to take some time to talk about today is the whys of congestion. People are very concerned about it. We know it's a problem, but why is it happening? So planners have identified 4 main reasons for this area that we see as the root causes, and I'm going to break them down for you in detail. I really think it's important to understand those root causes so that we can start to consider if we want to address those instead of just addressing the symptoms. So spread out development pattern, that's where we're going to start. This is the suburbs, which means that the pattern of development is spread out over a large area as opposed to an urban space. Houses and buildings are set back from the street with large open green spaces, large lawns. There's different kinds of land uses that are separated from one another. So you've got your residential housing over here, you've got your commercial over there, etc. But the distance created by this land use configuration between houses and workplaces and stores and schools, that means that driving ends up being the most feasible way to get around. So that's what increases the quote unquote travel demand on the roads. The next one is, actually, I do want to go back to that just for one moment here. I want to acknowledge that this is a lifestyle preference and no one's saying that it has to go away or be changed. It's just something that we're acknowledging as part of why congestion happens. So regional and commuter traffic. Okay, so this area experiences a lot of traffic on its main roads, partly because a lot of people work in this area. So we have Hamilton Place Mall, the retail around it, the offices, the hotels, lots of other workplaces that exist here, and roughly 13,000 people are making that commute most days of the week. Likewise, most of the residents here in the workforce in this area are commuting out of this area to their jobs. Just a fraction there, roughly 800, both live and work in the same area. So you got a lot of people in, a lot of people out. That tends to fill up the roads. These numbers also don't include regional traffic that's non-commuter. So it doesn't factor in all the shoppers. There's tens of thousands of cars that are coming in any given week to shop at malls and stores, to get treatment in Erlanger, other kinds of trips. And then the third and fourth points here, these kind of go hand in hand. A disconnected street network and a lack of transportation choices. So one of the major appeals to people living in the suburbs is living on a quiet street, maybe at the end of a cul-de-sac. But when there's lots of neighborhoods that are all full of cul-de-sacs and there's not many entrances in or out of the subdivision, there's not a lot of alternate routes available. So everybody has to pile onto the same main road to get from their home to anywhere else. The traffic engineers and wonks in the space, we call this the hierarchical street network, but it basically means that there's lots of dead end streets, there's a couple of local streets, and then there's just a few main roads that everybody has to use. So these pictures here on the left, this is a good example of what we're talking about. This is the ball fields at Batter Place and Bellow Woods neighborhood just east of that. So the folks living at the house pinpointed on the map live just 1,200 feet away from the middle of the ballpark. But because of the street network, when it's game time and kids are ready to go, we've got to load up everybody in the car and drive almost 3 miles to get there. Compare that to a neighborhood on the right picture there. This is in Brainerd to the west. It's by Standiford Gap Park. Residents there in that home that I've identified, it's roughly the same physical walking distance, straight line, but they could actually walk to that park if they wanted to. And they actually have a couple different routes to take too if they want. I did actually speak with someone at Bella Root's neighborhood just yesterday. I think he's here today, and he said some of the residents there would like to see a walking path from their neighborhood to the ball field to make it easier to get there. These are good ideas that can help address the bigger issue a little bit. If we take a few car trips off the road by letting people get places by biking or walking, that's a few cars less that contribute to that overall traffic congestion problem. So the last one I want to share with you is this concept of the congestion cycle. For a really long time, we spent our efforts trying to address congestion, by widening the roads, which professionals now know is not necessarily the best solution. We can use an example like East Brainerd Road, which was recently widened to illustrate that point. So I'm going to point to the first one under there. Let's see on our graphic. First, the road is widened, top left. We're going to be going counterclockwise, okay? So first, the road is widened, usually to address congestion or an anticipation of more congestion. Things aren't bad at first. It's probably helped to alleviate congestion some, but because of the widening, the land further down the road is now more accessible to other additional drivers. So without a clear plan for where and how to grow, the value of those properties along the widened road starts to rise. Property owners see it as a good time to sell. Maybe they're getting calls. They're offered a good price for their property, or maybe they just decide they want to sell because the area is starting to change. Could be a combination of both. Then comes the new development, right? Rezoning to subdivisions or businesses, which is usually retail, starts to get built along that wide road. More and more people are coming, more and more people are moving there and shopping there and increasing the number of cars on the road. So eventually the congestion is back to where it started before the road was widened. The solution to the problem, strangely, actually recreates the problem again. So this concept is called induced demand. It's used by traffic engineers a lot. It seems counterintuitive, and you would think that widening a road works kind of like replacing a smaller pipe with a larger one. So, it allows the water to flow better, but instead that larger pipe is now actually just drawing more water into itself. And that's because the demand for roads is basically limitless. If you expand people's ability to travel, they'll do it more, living farther from where they work and therefore being needing to drive into town and to drive further away. Basically, there's always more water that's coming to that pipe from the source. So this lesson is being learned all over the country, and we've got pretty substantial proof that this is a real thing. This is a real concept. Places a lot bigger than us are seeing this. No matter how much money you pour at widening a road, make it 6 lanes, 8 lanes, 12 lanes, eventually it just gets congested again, because that's the congestion cycle. So just to end on my congestion rant, I guess, explanation here of getting to our root causes. I hope I haven't painted things in too negative of a light. I just want to illustrate kind of how we got here, that congestion is definitely part of how things work out here to some degree, because of the way we built it over time. But that's not to say that we're stuck with the way things are. There are other kinds of opportunities to help alleviate congestion besides widening. And that's what our panelists here today are going to help us explore. So I'm going to give each panelist a few minutes to introduce themselves and explain their perspective on transportation as it relates to Area 11, as well as nationally. So panelists, when I say your name, please say hi so your window pops up and everyone can see your face. Today we have Melissa Taylor and Caroline Daigle.
Hi.
And Melissa and Caroline are part of our strategic long-range planning office at the RPA. We also have Rachel Bergman at TDOT.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We also have Eric Asbo, our city planning department.
Hi, good to be here.
And Justin Simon, also of city planning.
Good evening.
All right, Melissa and Caroline, I'm going to hand it off to you guys first.
Great, thanks. If you don't mind advancing to the next slide. Good. So as Eric mentioned, I'm Melissa Taylor. I direct the Strategic Long Range Planning Department, and I would say a good percentage, 80, 90% of my work and our work as a department is for the federally mandated transportation planning organization. So if you would go to the next slide, Eric. Thanks. As Eric mentioned, it is a federally mandated organization, and there are quite a few staff in the agency that work on staffing the functions. Predominantly, the bigger plans that I'll talk about here are handled within my department, but we do have folks like Ewan Lee. She directs the Research and Analysis Department. She was unable to be with us this evening, but she staffs quite a few functions as well that may come up during the conversations here this evening. But as you can see from the map there, the TPO covers quite a big area, and these are federal funds that are programmed in a variety of documents that cover this entire area. So all of Hamilton County, and then portions of Georgia counties, and all of one Georgia county, Catoosa. So you can see it's a pretty big area there. There are 4 county governments and 15 local municipalities. So when we staff that, we're responding to a legal board, which is the Transportation Planning Organization Board. There are 28 members of that board, and we bring our documents, recommendations to them, and they make decisions about the process. We coordinate in that process with 2 federal agencies, 2 state DOTs, and 3 transportation and 3 other big transportation authorities like Hamilton County Rail Authority and the airport. So, and then ports and some other intermodal representatives also serve on that board. Our planning products, the ones I'll speak about tonight and tend to be the bigger ones that come up in conversations with the public or when we're doing planning processes with the public, are our regional transportation plan. So that's every 5 years we do that plan, and it looks out for 20 plus years. So it's a pretty long range document, and not always do the projects programmed in that document come to fruition. They can move in and out of the plan between those 5-year periods, but it is a requirement. And so any project that would then make it into a shorter range or list of projects that might be worked on by a jurisdiction, we would expect that they're going to be there in the first tier of the plan, which we consider the part of the plan that we move into the next transportation improvement program. And so that's the shorter list of projects that are actually have funding dedicated to them. And it covers 4 years. And so if you have interest in a particular project that you want to know if it's been federally funded or not, or it's in the works, as we call it, then you would want to be looking in the Transportation Improvement Program, that shorter list or range of projects. And you would end up seeing maybe some phasing in there about it's in a PE, NEPA, the environmental phase of the project, or maybe it's in its right-of-way or construction phase, and those would be shown in the Transportation Improvement Program. And because of these timeframes, projects take a long time. Sometimes a project, a roadway project, like Eric was talking about, a widening project might take 15 to 20 years before it actually gets complete and open to traffic. And that's, I think, something that's misunderstood by most of the public when they hear that a project is underway or being built. I think it's natural to assume that it's underway right now, or we could look out there and see construction, but that's not the case. Oftentimes, we just mean that there have been funds programmed for it, or it might be in this shorter range project, but still looking out for a phase, maybe 4 to 5 years from now. We also have the congestion management process, which is also a mandated requirement for the size of our planning organization. We're more than 250,000 people. You need to do what's called you're producing documents for what's called a transportation management area. And so in those areas, a congestion management process is required. So I'll be cutting into the chat box some information about how you can get involved. We have a process underway right now to update our congestion management process and to respond to the outcomes of our state of congestion report, which I cut into the chat box moments ago. Okay, Eric, if you could go to the next slide. As I mentioned, the Regional Transportation Plan is one of our main documents, and we have the 2050 plan going on right now. We're in the early stages, but the public involvement process is open. And so Caroline will be talking about that in a moment. But as you can see there, the staff of my department, myself, Betsy Evans is also a senior planner on my team and handles a lot of the environmental work that we do and handles the Transportation Improvement Program that I spoke about. Caroline will be talking to you a little bit more about our RTP, but generally, the Regional Transportation Plan takes 2 years to complete. So it's not an easy feat. There's a lot that goes into it, and we even spend almost a year preparing or getting our ducks in a row with data and other aspects of the functions to be able to actually get the process underway. And so we are now in that process, and on our website, which is shown here, there are a variety of ways to get involved, but most notably for actually understanding what all topics we talk about and what all is going on with existing conditions in the area, you'll want to visit our story maps. That's the place where you'll find pretty much just a rundown of what's going on with various topics in the planning process, gives a lot of background and also opportunities to provide input. But once we complete the plans, then we'll have a new slate of projects that are in the pipeline, meaning they are funded like for a virtual reality, I guess, into 20 years. And they can move into being funded in that Transportation Improvement Program. So that's sort of the pipeline there for moving projects into construction or into where they can begin to be implemented. Also with the plan, we have a lot of priorities or we need to address priorities. And so there is a method for evaluating and prioritizing projects. And most of that is extremely data driven. We use a lot of analysis to prepare and to prioritize and put to our TPO board a slate of recommended projects for the large revenue that is built over the course of that 20-year time frame. So a lot goes into it, and we would encourage everyone to visit the website and learn a little bit more about it. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Caroline so she can talk about how you can more specifically get involved. Caroline?
Thanks, Melissa, and hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Daigle. I'm a senior planner in the Strategic Long Range Planning Department of the Regional Planning Agency and Transportation Planning Organization. We're really fortunate to get to kind of work in both sides of planning and see the transportation stuff from a regional perspective, and also partner with our colleagues working on land use plans and area plans that are more site and a smaller scale and more site specific. So it's a really exciting role to be in. Next slide, please, Eric. So like Melissa mentioned, we have a lot of planning products that come out of the Transportation Planning Organization's work. We're working at this really big regional scale to prioritize all the federal funding that comes to our region for transportation projects, and to determine, we all know this conversation, right, of unlimited needs and limited funds and limited resources to meet those needs. And so figuring out, what does the data say? What's the public say? What's kind of the goal and the vision for our transportation network for the future is a really big part of the TPO's work. And doing that prioritization of projects and looking at, which projects will help best make progress towards achieving the region's goals is a really big part of what we focus on and what we do with the TPO. So before talking a little bit more specifically about the regional transportation plan, I did want to make a plug for a lot of education materials that we have developed to help explain the TPO's work in a little bit more detail. We've got 9 education brochures that are on our website, and I think Melissa will enter the link for those in the chat box. I've kind of overwhelmed the chat box with a lot of links, but hopefully between them all, you can get to all the TPO's work and everything that you need to learn more about this process. So these brochures will talk about issues that we all face every day with transportation, right? Like what's being done about road safety? How do we, approach dealing with traffic and congestion? How does the TPO balance priorities in this environment where there's, limited funding and unlimited needs? Why do transportation projects take so long, right? Like, what is the process that projects have to flow through to go from, being recommended in a plan document to seeing those orange construction cones on the ground? And so a lot of this field is really jargon heavy, and we know that, and we're trying to do a better job at, distilling some of that information and making it more accessible and more easy to be engaged with for people that don't work in transportation planning on a daily basis. So I do encourage everybody, if you haven't already, to check out the education materials that we have about the TPO. And we also did a webinar series late 2020 called Get to Know the TPO, a webinar. It's about 15 minutes, and it goes into a little bit more detail about what this transportation planning stuff is and how we approach our work. And then speaking kind of specifically to the RTP, like Melissa mentioned, the RTP is prioritizing transportation projects for federal funding through a pretty robust analytical process that's looking at, and considering, the impacts of different projects based on the different scales that they're in our region. And you can learn more about that on the RTP website as well, and kind of based on how projects help us achieve the region's goals. So that process and how we're evaluating projects and how we're prioritizing them is directly informed from public input that we hear throughout the planning process. And so it's really important to be involved in this process and to share your experiences, your concerns, what's your day-to-day experience with the transportation network in your area, in your neighborhood, and what improvements would you like to see? And so sharing that in the RTP process does kind of directly correlate with projects that get recommended at the end of the day. So it's a really important process to be involved in. And one of the feedback opportunities that's on the RTP website right now deals with identifying community resources. There's a helpful screenshot on the slide here showing those in Area 11, and you can find more details when you're engaging with that map online. You can click on each point and see what resource it is. And so this is something that we're doing to identify, what are those essential resources like grocery stores, parks, schools, other destinations kind of in your neighborhood that we want to, encourage projects that would promote safe multimodal access to those resources. So basically, giving points to projects that make it easier to get to those resources without using a car, especially for people that are in those neighborhoods, just like the example that Eric was showing earlier, a neighborhood right next to a park. How can we make those connections to take a few car trips off the road? And we know that this is, probably a drop in the bucket in a lot of ways, but it's a really important piece of the puzzle to look at those resources in people's neighborhoods and think through what are the opportunities to create, new ways to access, really essential community resources like that, and make sure that people have access to them. So that's just one plug for one thing that you can contribute to in the RTP. You can check out the resources that we've already mapped in Area 11 and make sure nothing is missing from your neighborhood or from your area that you'd like to contribute to that map so that it's included in the plan when we analyze projects later on through the planning process. There's also a survey, a vision, goals, and objectives survey that you can fill out to share your priorities for, if it was your money, how would you be spending it? How would you prioritize, seeing all of these competing goals and competing needs in the transportation system? What would you put above, what goal would you put above another goal, and how would you set those priorities and invest in the region's network over the future? So just really want to encourage everybody to take some time to look over those materials. There's an education flyer that deals specifically with congestion. I won't read it to you right now, but it does kind of have that congestion cycle graphic that Eric showed earlier. And there's just a lot of great information in that. So if you've got any questions about the RTP and how to be involved and how to share your thoughts, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. And with that, Eric, I'm ready to hand it back to you. Eric, it looks like you're on mute still. I see that you're trying to talk.
It's a rookie mistake. I've been doing this for many, many months, and I still do that sometimes. I was going to say thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Melissa, for as succinctly as you reasonably can. TPO does a lot to in the region, and there's a lot to plug. So thank you for as briefly as you can, covering a lot of ground. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Rachel next. Rachel.
Thanks, Eric. And thank you for having me today. So my name is Rachel Bergman, and I am a senior planner with TDOT's Office of Community Transportation. Go to the next slide. So the Office of Community Transportation, or OCT, is based in TDOT's Long Range Planning Division, which is responsible for developing and managing statewide transportation studies that help guide future TDOT projects and programs. So I work out of TDOT's Region 2 office, and I've provided a map of Region 2 and our urban and rural transportation planning partners on the slide, just so you can see kind of where we work. But we are based here in Chattanooga. So OCT does lead TDOT's coordination with these partners, and that includes a lot of close coordination with the Chattanooga TPO. We provide oversight and coordination to local agencies and partner on land use and transportation decision-making. In metro areas such as Chattanooga, we rely heavily on the TPO to inform TDOT programs and projects. We use everything that Melissa and Caroline talked about, including the RTP, the TIP, the Congestion Management Plan, to identify and prioritize projects. As you all heard, there's a lot of work that goes into these plans. There's a lot of public involvement that goes into it. And we rely on the work of the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the TPO to help identify state-funded state priorities as well. So these state projects that are identified as priorities as part of the RTP and TIP are then submitted to TDOT for consideration in our statewide transportation improvement program, or STIP. And this is for projects that impact state routes and other state managed roads. So just before we move on from this slide, I just want to put another plug in for that public involvement opportunities, because those also benefit us at TDOT at a statewide level. Next. So in Area 11, there is only one state route, which is Brainerd Road, or State Route 320. So I'm not going to discuss the larger areas, but you will see on the map that I've included some projects that are going on outside of Area 11, as we all understand that roadways outside of your area impact your ability to work, to commute, and to enjoy Chattanooga. So just for recently completed projects that are also not shown on the map, in 2014, TDOT did complete a widening of over 2 miles of Brainerd Road in Area 11 from Graceville Road to Bel Air Road. The entirety of Brainerd Road in Area 11 was also resurfaced in the last 10 years. So we have made some improvements on that one state route in your area. So current projects in your area include safety improvements along portions of Brainerd Road as you go out towards Ooltewah-Ringgold Road. And we are also working with the city on the I-75 interchange modification at Hamilton Place that will be completed following the city's funded Goodwin Road extension. I also want to note the green lines up by the interstate and in the mall area, and those are a CDOT managed project that are funded through a TDOT grant called the Congestion Management and Action Program, and Congestion Management and Air Quality Program, or CMAQ. Through this awarded grant, the city is upgrading traffic signals and improving transit service in Area 11 and beyond. The goal of this grant is, as implied in the name, to improve congestion and air quality in our urban areas across the state. So if you're interested in TDOT projects statewide, I'm going to place the link for iTrip, where all of these projects are located, in the chat box. And so you can look at projects not just in Area 11, but across the whole state. So you can go to the next slide. I also wanted to share some of other TDOT resources that you may not be aware of if you're interested in other projects or data in your area. The first of these is Tennessee TN Times, which reports average annual daily traffic, or AADT, for major roads, not just state routes. Traffic is counted annually on most roads, and using TN Times, you can see both the current counts and how that number has changed over time. Second, TDOT maintains a list of all proposed pavement resurfacing projects across the state. The proposed 2022 list is available now, and it does include Brainerd Road from Hamlet Drive to Ooltewah-Ringgold Road, which is just outside of Area 11. Finally, for all projects that are managed in the state, TDOT maintains
Did we lose her? I'm not sure.
Such as the I-75, I-24 interchange. I also want to put a plug in to sign up for emails, as TDOT regularly sends out emails about road closures and other project updates. So that's a great way to stay informed, as I know that the split and the ongoing construction is an ongoing issue for a lot of people. I do want to note by concluding that TDOT also manages various grant programs across the state to do transportation projects such as adding sidewalks and bike lanes, increasing transit operations, or improving accessibility. And that's just to name a few. I want to note that the city of Chattanooga and the TPO actively seek out and apply for these opportunities to support transportation investments in the city. The CMAQ program I mentioned earlier is just one example of how the staff that's speaking today is just continuously seeking to improve Chattanooga for all of us. So I'm going to post the links to all of these resources in the chat box, but I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more about TDOT with you today.
All right, thank you, Rachel, appreciate you. Next we have Eric Asbo.
Hi, thanks, Eric. I'm Eric Asbo, the interim deputy administrator for city planning for the city of Chattanooga, and I'm formerly with the Chattanooga Department of Transportation. So have been working on and familiar with transportation infrastructure challenges and opportunities within this area. And we'll just say that it is the area planning process and specifically what's happening here in Area 11 is such a vital part of the city understanding what priorities are, how, as Caroline so eloquently put it, the unlimited needs and limited resources can actually be used for the biggest benefit for the most people in this area. So the city of Chattanooga, working with our partners at TDOT and RPA and TPO, are responsible for implementing projects on streets within both this area and across the city using federal funds as well as using local funds. So that's everything from, as Rachel mentioned, the larger scale projects from the transit signal prioritization. We're working with TDOT on improving the interchange at Hamilton Place Boulevard, everything, down to the scale of installing new sidewalk and curb ramps to ensure accessibility and safe pedestrian access, and resurfacing streets all across the area. And one of the big changes that has happened in recent years, as Eric has alluded to, is that we're both recognizing the need to increasingly focus on maintenance of our existing infrastructure. With the city and cities across the country are experiencing backlogs that have built up over decades, both in terms of our roadway infrastructure, our signal infrastructure, our bridges, and other transportation infrastructure that's really, really important and vital that we focus on maintaining what we have while balancing the needs to do so with installing new infrastructure or other capacity issues. We'll also just said that, and my colleague Justin will be able to speak to this as well, that hearing from the people who live and work in Area 11, again, is really essential to us as a city understanding what the priorities are, what the biggest pain points are, and how we can best serve you in the coming years. I'll turn it back over to you, Eric.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Eric. And last we have Justin.
And what Eric meant is last and probably least. But no, my name is Justin Stein. I'm the capital planning manager for the city of Chattanooga. And so what my office does is to broadly oversee the city's capital projects as well as the city's capital budget process. And so we have transportation is our biggest category of expenditure aside from our enterprise funds, which I don't want to get too far off topic, but enterprise funds include for the city sewer, water quality, Tennessee Valley Regional Communication System, and solid waste. So sewer tends to be the largest, but transportation in our general fund is definitely our largest area of expenditure. So in working with our partners for TPO and TDOT, when it comes to the TPO, there's almost always a required city match for those projects. And then the city is managing and implementing those projects too. And so part of capital planning's job is to kind of keep an eye on those projects and make sure that we're budgeting sufficient funding to provide the match. And then it's not uncommon that maybe a project scope changes or there are unanticipated costs, and the city is responsible for paying additional funds to cover those. Capital planning is also just responsible for budgeting for our other categories of expenditure like parks, bridges, and pretty much anything the city builds or maintains that isn't a program is something we do or are involved in. We also have worked on implementation of all of the public infrastructure repairs from the tornado damage in Area 11. And as Eric mentioned, we also oversee kind of the public process for the capital budget as far as hearing from you all as to what projects are important to you and what we need to prioritize. So an important thing that when we're talking about balancing all of the needs, unlimited need, limited resources is that the way the city's budget structure and funding structure is set up is the funding that pays for capital projects is largely the same funding that pays for everything else in the operations budget. So if we have an increase if we hire 10 more police officers, that's that much less money that could potentially go to a capital project and vice versa. So it's always a balancing act of trying to decide, how much do we need to spend on infrastructure and projects versus the 2,600 full-time employees of the city of Chattanooga who are the people who provide all those services to you as city residents. Trying to think what else I might have left out. But I think that broadly encapsulates like kind of what capital planning does, and that we kind of have a hand in a lot of things, but are usually partnering with almost everyone to help get things done. So I'm happy to answer questions about specific capital projects that might be in Area 11 that you're interested in. And maybe another thing to kind of delineate is that, you've got TDOT projects, which they discussed already, TPO projects, which are federally funded, but usually city implemented. And then in many locations, like things like resurfacing and new sidewalks are largely just locally funded and constructed. So the city has individual responsibility for a lot of those things too. One thing we have really been focused on that several other people mentioned is just being more focused on maintenance of infrastructure. We have a lot of deferred maintenance, and as an example, like in 2014, I think the city spent less than $2 million on repaving streets. And in this upcoming budget, that number will be much, much larger by several orders of magnitude. And part of the reason is we're also completing planning processes like our transportation asset management plan that help us understand what our deficits are and what we need to do, what we need to be investing to keep some of our largest categories of assets that are, roads as an asset for the city are worth billions and billions of dollars. Bridges are worth hundreds of millions collectively. And so it's important for us to not just build those things, but to also maintain them, because it costs a lot more to maintain something that has not been maintained for 20 years than it does if you maintain it on a regular basis. So anyway, I think I've taken up enough time, but happy to answer any questions.
That's great, Justin. Thanks. I think now we're going to, I'll turn it over to Karen. Do we have any questions in the Q&A box?
I don't see any yet, but if anyone in our audience would like to type in a question, we will be glad to address those. I think, Eric, you might just want to, while we're waiting for that, tee up one or two to our panelists.
Sure. Give it just a moment. Okay. So yeah, I do have a couple of questions for Karen, just in case we're a little slow going at first. So first question I'll ask is, so we know that capacity improvements like road widening are really expensive. They take a lot of years to implement, and sometimes they're not as effective as we hope they would be. So panelists, broadly, anybody jump in if you want to. What are some other strategies for alleviating congestion and in a place like Area 11, either instead of or prior to deciding to widen a road? What are some other things we can do? Anybody want to take that one?
So I can take it first, just to say that from the big picture standpoint, when I mentioned earlier that our research and analysis department handles our congestion management process, part of that process is to look at strategies. And of course, they are undergoing what that looks like right now for this new update to the congestion management. But I did ask Ewan to supply just a few thoughts about that. And right now, they really feel like the potential strategies that they're exploring are associated with more operational improvements. So making sure that traffic is able to move through intersections well. A lot of you are familiar with roundabouts that have been introduced to the area for a number of years now. Taking advantage of ITS systems, so dynamic messaging sign that you see on some of the roadways that helps to tell you about certain circumstances that are happening on the roadway, or to give you advance notice of closures and things like that. And also just coordinated signals. I think someone spoke earlier about some of the work going on with TDOT and the city of Chattanooga on just signalization. Access management, so making sure that there aren't curb cuts one right after another. So the best way to consolidate or to address that issue. And then transportation demand management strategies, which kind of a big thing, and it encompasses a lot of different aspects, including land use or telework. So the work from home that we all saw changes, the traffic on the roadway. When we have a lot of people working from home, we don't see those issues. And then incident management, clearance time for accidents or other issues that happen, obstacles in the road, things like that. Looking here quickly to make sure I didn't miss anything. Nope. But they do expect that, congestion will continue to increase. It's just kind of the nature of those circumstances. So we're just continuing to address it in the best way that we can in terms of planning that better as we move forward in the future.
Does anybody want to add to that?
Yeah. Eric, I'll jump in quickly and say that, I think that this is with a lot of challenges that the city faces. Like, if there was an easy fix, we would have flipped the light switch already. And so we have to think about, like Melissa said, no single one of those ways to start to address congestion is going to be sufficient, and we need to think about how we're looking at all of them across the board. And I think even going back to the slides that you were talking about, Eric, what are the ways in which we are helping to make possible small trips, short 1 mile, 3 mile trips that we know are the majority of trips that people are taking on any given day, possible in safe and comfortable ways that don't have to be driving alone in a car. And it's a challenge because there are not the street networks in the Area 11 that there are, say, in downtown or some of Chattanooga's oldest areas that were built out many decades ago, but there are smaller ways that we can start to build those connections, like that pedestrian connection that you had in your example for people to be able to walk to the park, that allows the families that live along those streets around there to not need to get into their car and drive a couple of miles out of the way in order to get there. So looking at those smaller incremental changes that we can make to start to enable people to do that. We're not expecting that someone who lives in Area 11 is going to walk to a job that is in Ottawa or downtown Chattanooga. But if they need to, say, go to visit their cousin or pick up their child from school, there may be alternative ways for that to happen. And then building on a couple of the things that Melissa mentioned too, the City of Chattanooga has been working to have, both connect our traffic signal infrastructure centrally so that we can both monitor it in real time, make adjustments in real time, and are working to build out technology to allow for real-time responsive signal timing changes to enable the flow of traffic to be optimal for reducing congestion, as well, which has the benefits like Rachel mentioned in terms of the congestion mitigation and air quality grants. We see improvements in air quality, which we also are concerned about and need to address across the region. So I think anyway, I'll leave it at that, but that's just to say that there are lots of different ways, each of which is a contributing factor, and then towards helping to reduce congestion and making improvements.
Eric, just to add on to what Eric and Melissa have already shared, I believe that they have shared a lot of the strategies that TDOT encourages as well, including the traffic signal prioritization and the dynamic messaging and all of that. But just two things, because I know we saw from the beginning of the slide, a lot of people are commuting in and out of the area. We know that you're relying on interstates. So two of the programs that TDOT uses on interstates are our TDOT help trucks, which can help clear incidents off the road, as well as this TDOT SmartWays, which uses live camera data to kind of monitor traffic on highways and also controls all of those messaging boards. Those video feeds are managed directly in our Chattanooga office. And so they can quickly be responded to and quickly report. And so I do encourage you to use those resources and stay up to date with them, because it's a way that, we know a lot of congestion happens from unforeseen events such as crashes or bad weather instead of regular travel. And so having those additional resources on hand when those unexpected delays happen may be a benefit.
That's great. Thank you all. I want to go back to something that Melissa said near the end of her part. She was talking about how we're the congestion is sort of a it's because of the circumstances that we're in, and I think that went back a little bit, or relates back to what I was speaking to about the root causes of congestion, which is sort of our land development pattern. I want to put this question to Eric, and maybe to Karen Hunt if you want to jump in as well. What are some examples of other kinds of strategies that the city has already used to address congestion, or is looking to use to alleviate congestion from a land use or land development standpoint? What have we done already in other places, or what are we looking to use in other areas where there's support for it?
I can start and say, building on what Melissa was saying before she jumped off. The area planning process, or land use planning, generally obviously is fairly zoomed out, but the city gets built on a parcel by parcel basis, and so we need to. It's great to be able to have a strong basis from which we have a shared vision towards building that out. But as the city is thinking about individual developments, or how those all link together, thinking even just about how people access the streets and the parcels within that is really, really important. And we can think about even the examples that you had, Eric, of people having to drive a long ways away that is a short distance as the crow flies, operates on a micro level even within, say, retail developments that are all adjacent to one another along a street. If you are at a grocery store and you have to go out onto the main road in order to get next door to pick up your dry cleaning, it's much less efficient and causes a lot of other congestion and delay for other people that can be alleviated by simply having driveways that get built between the two. So as we are seeing individual developments come through, requiring that those interconnections are made is one really small level, again, that kind of starts to adjust around the edges about how we start to do that.
Yeah, I will add to that, as Eric was mentioning before, just the very nature of how we develop our cities, kind of that spread out development pattern, actually can contribute some to that congestion. One of the things that we at the planning agency are looking at, not only in Area 11, but in different parts of the city as we work on different area plans, is how we can begin to cluster or create maybe higher concentrations of businesses and housing as well in areas. Not that you want to do that everywhere, because that doesn't solve the problem, but perhaps in the Hamilton Place area along Gun Barrel Road, we have unfortunately a lot of retail businesses that we've lost over the past year due to the rise in online shopping, and COVID just sped up that whole process. But we need to rethink, is those areas redevelop? What do we want them to look like? Can we build up a little bit in that area, make it a little more compact, more walkable, maybe bring some housing into that area? I know a lot of folks living in the East Brainerd area and in the neighborhoods people tend to not want apartment buildings in their neighborhood, and we totally understand that. But perhaps building those kinds of developments in and around someplace like Hamilton Place Mall, where you've got a lot of commercial development, and as we've been alluding to, maybe some people that want to, not everyone, but some people could maybe actually walk from the apartment where they live to where they work at the mall, or to the hospital, or somewhere. Every little bit helps, taking a few cars off the road. So again, this is not an easy fix. It's not a short-term solution. It's something that's going to take a long time, but over time, we're hoping to begin to move in that direction.
Eric, can I say something else? I want to just really quickly say that, like, one of the other reasons that we're thinking about and trying to identify lots of different ways of addressing congestion outside of simply widening the streets. Is that why the widening of streets has led to streets that are also can simultaneously be really, really unsafe for everybody who is using them. So if we think about some of our widest roads in the city and anywhere, they really, like, even if they are full to capacity, that happens at relatively limited times of the day that are really impactful, certainly, but compared to the 24-hour span, there may only be a handful of hours, certainly in the morning peak and the evening peak, at which there is really a full capacity. And because they are so wide, and because during some of those other times of day, there isn't as much traffic, it's a lot easier for cars to go much faster. The land use gets more separated out. It's harder to cross, if you need to reach something across the street, if you're a pedestrian, or even if you're a car trying to turn onto that street, you're having to contend with much larger spaces that you have to cross, cars that are often traveling at much higher rates of speed. And consequently, when crashes happen between vehicles or when pedestrians or bicyclists are involved, they can be much, much more dangerous. And so the benefits of keeping our streets smaller or figuring out other ways in which we can deal with congestion aside from just making them bigger has other benefits to it longer term as well.
Eric, we do have a question from someone in the audience.
I see that. Yeah, let's see if we can get this here. You want to read it off to our panelists?
Sure, if I can, well, kind of summarize it, just went away. But Jonathan was asking how often roads are reassessed for paving needs. Mentioned specifically Jenkins Road, said that now that the new elementary school has opened, they're seeing a lot more traffic through there, and feels like it's already in much worse shape than it was in before. If it was assessed 3 years ago, maybe is it time to go back and look at it again? So I don't know if Eric, Asbo, or somebody can address that. How often you reassess areas for paving?
Yeah, so we'll say, Justin mentioned the TAMP, the asset management plan that has been redone. And as a part of that, we just recently, within the last 12 months, reassessed all of the roads within the city of Chattanooga, all the local roads within the city of Chattanooga. So the previous time that it had happened before that was about 10 years ago. And that is longer between those two assessments than would typically be recommended. And that's part of the reason why we did such a thorough and comprehensive look at all of them. And that really is informing how we are approaching the ongoing recommendations that are coming out of that plan. So we will have, like I said, within the last 12 months data for Jenkins Road, and that's certainly going to be something that we'll look at in terms of what the needs are for that and how the roads within the area are being taken care of and maintained going forward. And then, moving forward from that, we have recommendations for much more regular and ongoing, so that assessment of the roadways. I would say I don't see the question there anymore, but if you have specific concerns about any road in the city of Chattanooga, of course, please use 311 to put those in. Not only if it's a pothole or something larger than that, we can, that helps us both understand where immediate concerns are, helps put streets like that might have longer term repair needs on our radar, so that we can be planning for the best way to do that.
That's a good point.
Answer the question, Karen? I couldn't see it anymore, but
yeah, no, I think that covered most of it. Eric McTravers, if I could maybe also put a plug in, Pam typed this in the question and answer box, but on the RPA's website, we also have what we call an existing conditions report for the East Brainerd area, which talks a lot about some of the recent projects, transportation projects, talks about, excuse me, what Eric was talking about earlier, some of the causes of congestion and those sorts of things, shows some maps. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that. It's a lot of really good information. It's not just about transportation. That's just one of the topics in there. Also, I'd like to put a plug in, and I'll remind you of this again at the end, but we also have a survey that will go live tomorrow on our website, asking questions about transportation. So I encourage all of you to please take that, encourage your friends to take it. Actually, we have 3 surveys. We will tomorrow have 3 surveys live. One's on commercial development, one is on housing development, and then we'll add a new one tomorrow morning about transportation. And then finally, next Thursday, we're going to have another panel discussion with another group of experts to talk about parks and greenways and natural resources, things like flooding, which I know is an issue in parts of East Brainerd. And we'll have a survey that addresses those topics as well. So just to put a quick plug in for all of those. And I don't see any other questions right now. So I think, Eric, you might have another one you might want to pose to the panel.
Well, I was going to say, if we've just got a few attendees left here, I can go ahead and wrap things up. If we're not boring you to tears yet, I hope this has been a helpful meeting for you. Karen did start to plug our some of the upcoming remaining work that we're doing, but as she said, we are in the middle of our public engagement phase. As you can see on that graphic, the schedule's been delayed a little bit with some staff changes, but we're back on track now. We've got one more panel. Surveys are available, and then in August we'll be planning a series of community workshops. Some will be online, but we'll plan to have at least one that is in person, maybe at Heritage Park or at the YMCA, a location like that where we can host some people there. And during those workshops, we'll be working on maps, big blow-up maps, where we can identify locations for where big land use change is desired, where preservation of existing areas is desired, and maybe where places could transition to something new. And then we'll also be meeting with a lot of different kinds of stakeholders in the East Brainerd community later on. We always try to involve a lot of different kinds of people, so residents, but also business owners, city and county departments, developers, just anybody who uses and works in that space. And then we'll be working later on the development of the plan document itself and onto the adoption phase. So these things take time, usually more than a year, but hopefully not more than 2. So we'll keep you posted if we can keep you involved. As we said at the beginning, we'd like for you to subscribe to our email list. That's the hyperlink at the top. I think somebody will be posting it in the chat box. So chcrpa.org/project/area 11 plan. Get on our email list, please. Take our surveys, the 3 that are available and 1 more that will be available after next week's meeting. And shoot us an email, contact@areaplan@chattanooga.gov. You know, if you've got questions that you think of after this, or maybe somebody you know couldn't attend tonight and they want to ask us something, just shoot us an email and we'll be happy to talk to you, and we're happy to show you around the office and show you what we do here. So just a couple of us over at on the 3rd floor of the DRC for this team, and we've got a few more people downstairs, but you know, we're welcome to show you around and show you what we do. 2 more things here. The transportation in the region, that's the TPO work that Melissa and Caroline were talking about earlier. If you want to know more about the transportation planning in the region, you know, which they really would like to have more people involved and really want that. So please go to that link, give your input and look around. And lastly, a recording of the meeting will be posted on YouTube. That's that link below. We'll put that in the chat box as well. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you especially to our experts for your time and your expertise. Hope to see you guys at the next panel. And I think that's it. Any more housekeeping notes, Karen?
I don't think so.
All right. Thank you again, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening.